Hi, thanks everyone for joining in and watching us today. I'm pleased to announce that Vanessa McCausland is joining us. So thanks so much, Vanessa, for joining us. Um, some of you might know Vanessa's books she has is The Lost Summers of Driftwood, which came out in January 2020 and was inspired by the South Coast riverside property she holidayed in as a child. Just want to mention that I recently listened to The Lost Summers of Driftwood. This is the first time I've read or listened to any of your books and really, really loved it. I gave it a 5 out of 5, which is
Thank
good.
you.
I have to say I don't give out 5 stars too easily, but yeah, really, really loved it and loved listening to the audio of it. It was really good. The Valley of Lost Stories came out in December 2020 and was inspired by the history of the Kapiti Valley near the Blue Mountains and a historic hotel that remains in the valley. And your new book was set on a tiny island off the coast of Tasmania, and it's The Beautiful Words, and it's going to be out in December. So looking forward to, as I said, The Lost Summers of Driftwood was the first of your books, so I'm really looking forward to reading more of your books. So thanks so much for joining us. Just wondered if you might want to start off by telling us a little bit more about your latest book.
Thanks so much, Jackie. That's so sweet of you to say that about The Lost Summers of Driftwood. So my latest book is The Ballet of Lost Stories. That one came out in December last year. It's hard to keep track because of COVID. Everything's running together. I'm like, was that last year, this year? So yeah, that one is, it's set in the Kapiti Valley, which is a real place. It's about 3 hours west of Sydney, just over the Blue Mountains. And it's basically about 4 women and their children, and they're invited to stay in this really gorgeous renovated Art Deco hotel in this valley. And they arrive there, and it's very remote. All that remains is this hotel and the remains of this shale oil mining town, which is kind of just slowly sinking into the bush. And it's sort of a place that's quite mysterious, and there are a lot of secrets there. And they discover that in 1948, a woman named Clara Black walked into the night and was never seen again. And as the women spend time there, it's discovered that they all sort of have secrets of their own. And so then, as the mystery of what happened 70 years ago to Clara Black unravels, one of these women also goes missing in the valley. So it's essentially, I think, a mystery, an atmospheric mystery with a strong sense of place, but it's got quite a strong historical thread as well. So it's partly set in contemporary Australia and then partly in 1948 in this, in the life and times of this shale oil mining town. And that's true history. There was a mining town actually there. And so I really wanted to recreate that. And I also explore the Indigenous history of the area with the Wiradjuri people, who are the custodians of that land, and just look at, you know, the history of what actually happened in that area with the Bathurst Wars and terrible massacres that happened. And so I guess the lost stories, meaning there's a thread of quite a few different stories of the past, of the Indigenous past, and then the stories that are haunting these women in their contemporary lives with their friendships and issues of marriage and motherhood.
Yeah, no, that sounds really interesting as well. Could you tell me, do you have some connection to that area?
I don't actually. As you mentioned with The Lost Summers of Driftwood, I sort of spent all the summers of my childhood holidaying on the river. But after writing that, I got so much wonderful feedback about the sense of place and how it was so evocative. I wanted to find another beautiful natural Australian setting. And so I just started researching online, and I found that there was this beautiful valley that had this town of 3,000 people that now is like lies in ruin. And I thought that'd be really interesting to like explore. It's essentially a ghost town. And so I dragged my mum and my daughter out there, and it's a really long way. Like it's on the way to Mudgee essentially. And you're just driving on like a single lane highway, and they're just thinking, why are we going to this place? But I really needed to get a feel for it. And as soon as we got there, I was like, this is the perfect setting for a book.
Yeah. And the missing woman, is that something that you'd heard about, or just something that you completely made up?
I actually made that up. And quite a few people have sort of been like, oh, you know, did she really disappear? She didn't, but it has a really strange feeling out there, I think, because it was once a thriving town, and then there's just these abandoned streets, and you can see old shop fronts that are just still sitting there with medicines from the 1950s in the window. And so it just had this really like eerie kind of but beautiful feeling, because I mean it's naturally so stunning. It's like looking, you're in a valley and you're looking up to the escarpment. It's just stunning. And so I just thought it has to be a big picnic at Hanging Rock, you know. And that's how it's been described, actually. Picnic at Hanging Rock meets Big Little Lies.
That's interesting. We've got a few people watching, which is really, really great. Saying to the people watching, if you do have any questions for Vanessa, please type them in comments and I can read out your questions. So both Anne and Sharon are wondering about what sort of research you had to do.
Yeah, so I'd never written historical fiction before, and I was a little bit nervous about it. But I'm a journalist by trade, and so I think it was just kind of natural. I just got online, read as much as I could, but there wasn't actually a lot written online about the Kapiti Valley and this shale. It was called Glen Davis shale oil mining town. And so I actually had to go and scour secondhand and vintage bookshops and I eventually found this, like, someone had written this entire, hardcover book all about the history of the valley. And she had grown up in this mining town as a child. And so I did a lot of research in terms of reading that and just trying to get a real feel for what it was like in the 1940s for particularly women to be raising children in the middle of the Australian bush. There was nothing there. It was prone to bushfires. It was prone to floods. It was such a harsh life. And they were there to be there for their husbands who were working in the mines. And it was actually producing petrol for the war effort.
And Anne's wondering how long it took you to write your book.
I think it took about a year and a half. I'd started it, but then when I went to the valley on the road trip, I kind of just thought I need to just start again, because having been there, it just changed my perspective, I suppose. So then I lost about 30,000 words, which is about a third of the book.
Oh, really? Wow.
So yeah, that took a bit longer.
Yeah. And Sharon's wondering if you write every day, and I'm also wondering, is writing your full-time job now, or do you have another job as well?
It almost is. I still do a day a week at a parenting website called KidSpot, and I've been doing that for about 5 years, and I just do that. I'm the weekend editor, so I spend my time during the week writing, but I definitely don't write every day. Like, I think that's just almost impossible for me. I have never been like that, and I think it kind of put me off for a long time because I just knew that I didn't have that consistency or that space in my life to write. And so I thought, well, I can never be an author or a writer because I can't write every day. But I don't think you have to. I think you need to write consistently. But I mean, I'd sometimes go weeks without writing, and it's still okay. Yeah.
Yeah. And could you tell us a little bit about how you became a writer, and is it something that you always thought you wanted to do?
I think I've always loved writing creatively. So I did creative writing at university, studied English. I knew that I just probably would want to write in some capacity, but I went into journalism because I thought, well, that's a way to sort of make money from writing. And I think being a journalist is really good training for being a fiction writer. I think a lot of fiction writers have been journalists in the past. And I think it's because, you need to live your life and experience things. And I worked as a news reporter on the Daily Telegraph for years, and covered like everything from house fires to car crashes to at one point I was doing the night shift, which you work from 6 p.m. till 6 a.m. and you have a police scanner and a photographer, and you basically follow the police around Sydney. And so I saw parts of Sydney that I'd never been exposed to. I was in my 20s and talking to police, and it was really good sort of life experience. And then and you see the best and the worst in people as well. As a news journalist, you see that humans are all sorts of shades of light and dark, and I think that helps with the conceptualization of characters. Like sometimes I'm writing a character and I think, is this too over the top? And then I think about some of the people that I actually have met, and I think, no, these people exist. And then there's also the dedication or the craft of just getting words on paper. And as a journalist with a deadline, you just have to. And so if my publisher gives me a deadline, I am always going to meet it.
Yeah. And have you been able to get any ideas from anything you worked with the police journalism for any of your books?
That's a really good question. I haven't been asked that before. Look, I think with all my books so far, they all have an element of a mystery, and they have an element which sort of involves a crime in some way or another. I wouldn't say that I write straight crime fiction in any sense of but I think I'm confident enough to write about, a drowning, or write about something that's befallen someone, and the police being involved with just that tiny little bit of confidence, just because I have seen a body washed up on a beach and gone to that crime scene and talked to the police about what happened. And so, I don't know if I'd have the confidence to do that otherwise. But at the same time, I don't think I'd want to fully write crime because I think I'd find it too grim. I kind of write fiction to sort of escape all of that, and I wasn't able to stay as a news journalist for that long because I think I'm quite sensitive, and I just thought, I can't keep doing this. I can't keep writing stories about sick kids and death.
And Sharon's wondering what you might have been reading lately, and if you have any recommendations for us.
Yes, I've written a little list because I always forget this. So some of the really amazing books I've read lately, Honeybee by Craig Silvey.
Yeah, that's a good one.
I just loved that book. I thought it was beautiful. The Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo by Taylor Jenkins, is it? That was incredible. Sorrow and Bliss by Meg Mason. I really enjoyed. And at the moment, I'm reading the Miles Franklin award-winning book, The Labyrinth, by Amanda Lowry. And I'm really enjoying her writing. It's very beautiful.
Thanks for those recommendations.
Pleasure.
Just wondering if you can tell us more about your book that you're working on at the moment. Is there anything you can share about that?
So The Beautiful Words is due out in December, and I have finished that, but we've still got to do the proofreading before it gets signed off to print. So this one I wrote during lockdown last year, and and I remember thinking, right, where will I set this? Because the setting's always the place that I start. And I remember seeing this tiny little island off the coast of Tasmania, near Bruny Island, called Satellite Island. And it's actually a private island that you can book. And it's so stunningly beautiful with this little boathouse. And I just thought, okay, that is my setting. And so I started at that point, and basically what the story is there's a woman called Sylvie, and she is a logophile. So she's a lover of words and stories, only she can't find her own story. So she was sort of cleaved apart from her best friend and soulmate, Case, 23 years ago, when something happened at this lighthouse, and the two never spoke again. And Sylvie was in an accident and bumped her head, so she has no recollection. And they haven't spoken in all that time. And then she gets a letter from Case saying, come to my 40th birthday party on this tiny island in Tasmania. And Sylvie accepts, and then she travels to Tasmania, and she sort of has to confront all these people from her past, and work out what exactly happened that night. And there she meets a man called Holden, and they're both lovers of literature, and so they call each other Sylvie Plath and Holden Caulfield. And it's a little bit of what would happen if Sylvia Plath and Holden Caulfield fell in love. So yeah, it's a book about reading, writing, literature, stories, and also sort of the fallibility of memory.
Yeah, sounds good. Were you able to visit there at all?
Yes, incredibly.
That's good.
So I wrote a lot of it just looking at pictures of this beautiful place. And I had been to Tasmania, but I hadn't been to Bruny Island. And then I slipped into Tasmania in, I think it was February or March, just before all the lockdowns. And there were lockdowns happening all over the place. Somehow I got there, and I was actually able to finish my book in Tasmania.
Oh, that's great. Yeah.
So it was just so beautiful. And now being in lockdown, I'm so thankful that I got there.
Yeah.
And I think it's probably going to be the only trip that I will do for quite a long time.
And you said that you finished writing that. Does that make, like, when you finish writing, are you already thinking about your next book after that?
I think with the one I'm writing right now that doesn't even have a title yet, I've only just sort of started that. I think because I've done quite a few books back to back because I've been contracted.
Yeah, you have to.
And because of COVID, I felt a bit burnt out, and I was just kind of like, I think I'm going to take a little bit of time. So I'm only really at the start of the next book. But yeah, I think it's hard creatively at the moment with COVID. I know a lot of authors and have writer friends, and everyone just feels really flat, and you know, you kind of need to fill your bucket up to have creativity, and there's just not a lot to be able to do that.
Yeah,
Like,
yeah. And
yeah.
it sounds like the setting's really, really important for the start of your book when you're first developing it and everything.
Yeah.
Wendy's wondering if the story comes after you find the setting, or do you have the story waiting for the scene?
That's a great question. Thanks. Definitely start with the setting. I'm not sure why, but I think, yeah, the story just sort of comes very slowly. I feel like for me, the plot and the story is a real wrangle. The setting and the description and the actual sort of writing is the thing that's easy and pleasurable. And so if I can know where I'm describing, at least I know how to start a chapter. So yeah, it's always the setting first.
Yeah, and how do you go about finding your settings?
I think I have to have an emotional connection to a setting to be able to set it there. And say with Tasmania, I mean, I didn't grow up there or anything, but there's just this sort of wildness and I don't know, changeability, and there's something about it that really resonates with me. Same with the south coast of New South Wales. Like, if I'm going to go on holiday, I would rather go somewhere wild and rugged than like sunny Queensland.
Yeah.
That's just my personality. And so, yeah, it's got to have an emotional resonance. But I think I really love nature, and so any natural setting, and I'm kind of going to be inspired. Like, I don't know how I'd go setting something in a city. I think I'll probably always gravitate to a natural setting. But having said that, the book I'm trying to write at the moment is set on a small island off the coast of France. So that's a little different because it's not an Australian setting, but I did actually live on that island when I was young. So I have all that recollection and memory that I can draw on.
And could you tell us, when you start writing your book, do you know how it's going to finish?
No, which is a bit problematic sometimes, because it's a massive trust exercise. And sometimes you just think, how is this all going to weave together? Particularly with the Valley, there's so many different story threads and characters, and I didn't know until the end how it was all going to play out. And I was just thinking, what happens if I'm like 3/4 of the way through and I can't find an ending? But so far, fingers crossed, I've always managed to find an ending. And sometimes I have a bit of a vague idea, but it never ends up how I think it will.
And if you could be a character from one of your books for a day, who would you choose to be?
Oh, that's a great question. Oh, wow. All my characters have got so many issues. I don't know if I want to be any of them. I think, maybe probably the nicest character that I've ever written, I think, is the book that's coming out in December. There's a character called Holden, and he's just the most lovely man. He's just gorgeous. With the Valley, my husband actually said to me, men are not really represented well in this book. He said, when you write your next book, can you write a really beautiful man? Because beautiful men do exist. And I said, okay, I will. And I think I have. So, yeah, it would be really interesting to be a man for a day, wouldn't it? See how the other half lives.
Yeah. Cena's wondering if you do anything special to celebrate when your book gets published. Might be a bit.
Well, I got a tattoo after The Lost Summers of Driftwood, actually.
Really?
And I sort of thought I might do that after every book that I publish, but then I was like, well, I'm coming up on like then 3 tattoos. That's quite a lot. So I didn't end up getting one for the Valley, but I got a rose after the Lost Summers of Driftwood, because the roses are a theme and they're on the cover. And that book was quite personal because it was dedicated to my grandmother. And so that was a really nice way to sort of mark that. But I always go out for a glass of champagne with my first readers. So I've got a couple of very close friends who are the ones that I first send the book to before my agent, before my publisher, and they tell me honestly whether it's good. And so we always go out and have a glass of champagne as a little celebration. So that's nice.
Oh, nice. Yeah. And what do you think, what do you hope readers will love about your books?
I think the setting and the place, from what I can gather, because as a writer, you don't always know what is going to resonate with people or what people are going to like, and you're often surprised. But I guess that sort of escapism to somewhere very beautiful, and also like a connection with the characters, just some of the stuff that they're going through. Just for me, when I'm reading, I want to be having those moments where I'm like, oh yeah, that's how I feel, you know, just not feeling as alone in some of the struggles of life. You know, I think my books tackle different things like grief and, you know, some of the struggles of motherhood. And so I do go to some dark places in the books, but I think that ultimately they're all quite hopeful books. I might go to dark places, but I think I try and find a way through for my characters. So to just have that sort of connection with readers in terms of what they might be going through in their lives.
And Wendy's wondering, once you start, do you find some characters seem to write themselves and take you for the ride?
Yes, absolutely. And that's actually my favourite part of the whole thing, where characters are doing stuff and you're like, oh, I didn't expect that. I don't plan my scenes. I have a bit of an idea of where it might be going, and so there's a lot of room for that in my writing. And it's just the most magical feeling when they just do something and it feels so much like they're alive, and they sort of take you in a different direction, and you're sort of cursing them for that, but at the same time it's really exciting creatively.
And what about characters' names? How do you go about finding your characters' names?
I don't know, they just pop into my head, I think, and then sometimes I'll play around with them and it just doesn't seem right. And then I have to name them something else, and I sit with that and maybe wait until it seems right. But it was interesting with the book that's coming out in December, Sylvie and Holden. My editors were quite keen to rename her Sylvia, and I just thought, no, she can't be a Sylvia, she's a Sylvie. It's just the sound of the word and the lightness of it. And I struggled for weeks to try and work out how I could change it, but I just couldn't. And so I think the character names are quite important to the feel of the whole character and what their traits are.
And your title, I think all your book titles are really great titles. Are they ones that you had at the start, or did someone else?
The only title that is my own from the start is The Beautiful Words. I was allowed to keep that one, which I was so thrilled at. All the others were just more simple to start with. So it was just Driftwood instead of The Lost Summers of Driftwood, and it was just The Valley instead of The Valley of Lost Stories. So it's always, I think a lot of authors have their titles changed, and a lot of the time it's for the better.
Yeah.
But I was thrilled to be able to keep my original title for my latest book.
Yeah. Well, thanks so much for talking to us. It's been great chatting to you, and I'm certainly looking forward to reading more of your books.
Oh, thanks, Jackie.
Just wondering before we go, do you want to tell people how they can keep in touch with you?
Yes, I'm on Instagram, just at Vanessa McCausland. I'm on Facebook as I think it's just Vanessa McCausland author. And I have a website, which is vanessamccausland.com.au.
Well, thanks so much, and hope we might be able to talk to you again when you have a new book out.
Oh, thanks so much for having me, Jackie. It's been
Thanks.
lovely.
And thanks to everyone who joined in. We had some great questions. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks. Bye, everybody.